The following is a production of Notch 6 Media.
It's the Notch 6 online podcast, episode number 45. In this episode, we talk with a true legend of the O-Gauge hobby. We traveled to Michigan and interviewed Mr. Richard Kughn, former owner and president of Lionel Trains. We look back on his time as owner of Lionel. We talked to him about the Madison hardware acquisition. And we ask him about his opinions on the past of the hobby, the present of the hobby, and the future of the hobby. It's an incredible episode, chock full of information and history on Lionel Trains, and it's all ahead on Notch 6.
This is the Notch 6 online podcast. Notch 6 is the podcast dedicated to O-Gauge trains. Whether you're collecting, operating, or just getting started, Notch 6 is your home for O-Gauge news, events, and interviews. Now here is your host, Derek Thomas.
Well, welcome in for this very special episode of Notch 6. Whether you're brand new to the hobby, whether you've been doing this for a long time, or you're somewhere in between, Notch 6 is your only online source for O-Gauge interviews, news, and so much more. And today, it truly is a special day here at Notch 6. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege to travel with the Lionel Collectors Club of America to Dearborn, Michigan, and we got to sit down with Richard Kughn, former owner of Lionel Trains, for over an hour in his personal train room. And we're going to talk about Lionel Trains, his history in the hobby, the story of buying Madison hardware, and so much more. This is an incredible interview and something that I never would have dreamed possible when this show started only 18 months ago, that I would get a privilege to sit in Dick Kuhn's train room and run trains and talk trains, and just so excited to bring you guys this story. It has been a crazy but incredible month of October. York just wrapped up last week, and what a successful show for us as the Madison Poster Company and Notch 6. And the Madison Hardware t-shirts also have sold incredibly well on a second run. Thank you so much to everybody who supports these projects. It's what keeps Notch 6 going strong. Because I was tied down to the booth at York, didn't get a chance to get really any interviews this time around. Some interesting notes from York that if you haven't heard yet, a couple of really cool things, and we are going to bring you some stories about some of these items later in 2015, or I should say earlier in 2015. But I promise we'll get around to a little bit more in-depth information on these stories. Number one, Bachmann Trains is coming out with their own app to follow Lionel and MTH. So we have three major players in the hobby now that are going to have their own smartphone app. From what I've heard, the Bachmann app is pretty slick. And the other neat thing that I'm hearing is that the Bachmann Train app doesn't necessarily require a Wi-Fi box, so to speak, but that technology is built directly into their engines. And so, it'll be hook up to the phone and go from what I understand. Looking forward to getting more information on that as it becomes available. But from what I've seen from photos, that it looks like it's pretty close to done. And so hopefully we'll see this technology make its way into the Bachmann line very, very soon. Other things that I'm hearing that I think are interesting from the Lionel camp. From what I'm hearing, there were a few unannounced features to the Vision Line Big Boy that is shipping, from what I'm being told, in December. And it looks like they're going to hit that date. I'm understanding that these engines are in final production right now. And so for those of you who ordered it, some cool things on the way, including a wheel slip sound, engines going in and out of synchronization, which is something that people have asked for on these models for a long, long time. And a couple of other neat features that were previously unannounced. So a few bonus items for those of you who pre-ordered this engine, and Lionel looks like they're going to deliver all the way through. I got a chance to run the engine myself on Saturday morning before the show opened, and hopefully no one told Mike Reagan that. But got to take it for a lap around the Lionel layout. And this thing, the sound will blow your socks off. I mean, it is just an incredible mammoth engine. And it's amazing how far the technology has come in these engines in really a rather short amount of time. So for those of you waiting for that engine, yay. You guys are going to have a blast with this thing. Something else other at the Lionel booth that I thought was interesting is I overheard that the folks that ordered the anniversary edition of the Polar Express, the scale version of it, The rail sounds in this engine now include 26 lines of dialogue from the actual Polar Express movie, which is really, really, really cool. So if you like your trains to talk to you while they run, well, this thing is going to have the authentic sounds from the Polar Express movie. And so, again, one of those unannounced features, but packs a lot more play value into a really neat train already. So those are a few of the bits and pieces that I was able to pick up just sitting at my booth and walking around before the show starts. Again, we feel like we covered the news pretty well leading up to York in terms of Lionel didn't make any blockbuster product announcements. You got the MTH announcements and the MTH catalog show. There were a few things here and there that, like I said, I feel bad that we missed, but we'll pick up the slack somewhere down the road. Okay, without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get to the main event here, since this is a rather long interview. It runs just about 50 minutes, and we went to Dick Kuhn's house in Dearborn, Michigan, and the reason we were there, we were with the Lionel Collectors Club of America under the pretense of spending an evening with Richard and Linda Kughn, and this was an LCCA event. What Dick didn't know is that it was a surprise birthday party for his 85th birthday, which happens right here at the end of October. And so this was a great chance to get his people that work for him together, former Lionel employees together, and LCCA members that just wanted to travel and have a chance to meet this legend in the hobby. And so we sat down with Dick in his train room, and what a train room it is. If you'd like to see photos of the train room, hop on over to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/notch6. That's NOTCH and the number 6. There's photos posted there. The LCCA was also right there during the interview, and they actually video recorded the whole thing. So there will be some video of this interview taking place that will get shared in a couple of different segments down the road, and those will be at the Lionel Collectors Club of America website, which is lionelcollectors.org. So great interview, an hour that was just absolutely incredible. I really can't even begin to describe how lucky and how blessed I feel to get the opportunity to do interviews like this. But we're excited to bring you the story as well. So, without making you wait any longer, it's Dick Kughn, former owner of Lionel Trains, right here on the Notch 6 podcast.
This is Notch 6, your first source for breaking news and in-depth interviews in the world of O-Gauge.
Well, welcome to this very special episode of the Notch 6 podcast. I'm privileged enough to be sitting in the train room of Mr. Richard Kughn today, the former owner and president of Lionel Trains Incorporated, somebody who I've admired for many years and somebody who's been gracious enough to take some time and sit here and tell us about his involvement with Lionel. Dick, thank you so much for the time. We're so glad to have you on the show. Welcome.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you.
This is going to be a lot of fun, and it's so exciting to get your take on your time at Lionel. I always start my interviews by asking about what was your childhood like and how you got involved in model railroading. From what I understand, it was kind of an accident.
Yes, it was. Well, not an accident. It was just a happening, and I was walking home from school, and it was trash day. And out in the street or whatever was a trash barrel. And sticking out of the top of it was the Lionel train, set, traffic, transformer. And I looked at it and I said, well, let me take it home. Maybe Dad can help me put it together, make it run, we'll see. So I did. I took it home. Dad took it down the basement with me in pursuit and put it up on the ping pong table, cleaned it up, and went to work on it. And we got it running. And that was my exposure to a Lionel train, the beginning of a hobby and a passion that, boy, I'm still in love with.
Now, after that first train, after you got it working, did you think, okay, I enjoy this? And so did it just kind of start building after that first train? Did you get things for Christmas? How did it work after that?
Right. Christmas, I got a new tin plate set from Santa Claus and played with that. That had to be about 1939, something like that. And because it was 1937 that I found the trash barrel. So that got me started, and you can see on the shelf here one of the trains, not the exact one I had, but the same train model, which was my third train set. And that, of course, is not tin plate, the one I'm looking at right now. That had a die-cast engine, and that really got me going. And by then I was starting to grow up, and I was now getting into high school. And I continued on, and I subscribed to some of the magazines of the day and read up on things. HO was a big thing at that time. O Gauge, 027, were doing transition from tin plate on the rolling stock into the plastic units, and it was fun. And I did a train layout at the house up in the attic. Dad built a train table for me. I started doing a layout, small layout, and my buddies would come over and we'd work at the tabletop to build models and do things. And we actually had a lot of fun putting together a train layout. One thing I learned through that entire first several years of my train hobby life was that the Lionel trains had a great educational value to them. And what do I mean by educational? What did we teach? What did they learn? They learned electronics. They learned model making, mechanics, and model building, all of that. But I think probably the most important thing we learned was that we learned how to get along with other people in doing a program or a project that we wanted to be productive in. And we all had different ideas. But when you learn that at a young age, it prepares you for later life, knowing how to deal with other people and make sure you can make progress in the things you want to do.
Yeah, that's a very important point that you bring up, that these really are educational and always have been educational toys. And you make good points about electrical skills, model making. But, that's an interesting point about the fact that you learn to negotiate with other people and you learn to compromise and you learn to take ideas as a team and put them all together and put them together into this big project.
Right.
I like how you put that.
Yeah.
That it is as much as it's an exercise in team building as it is anything else. And I like how you explain that.
Right, and this layout you see here, it was a 2-year program getting it built. And I had a couple of my employees in here working with me that really knew about toy trains and how to go about it. And that's how this came to be, through the ideas of the three of us, blending them together and saying, well, that works or that doesn't work or whatever the case may be. And this is the end product, and I think it's a pretty good end product.
It's a beautiful layout, and we'll take some pictures and we will post them on our Facebook page for our listeners to get a look at this amazing layout in your amazing train room. This layout really is something to see. I mean, it's clear that a lot of time and a lot of love and a lot of effort went into creating this. So we'll be excited to share that with our listeners. As you continued to grow up and as you aged and obviously went through high school and started your business career, where did trains fit into all of that? Did it kind of go away and then come back? How did you develop in the hobby as you continued to grow up?
When I got out of high school, I was kind of floundering and bouncing around. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so for the first year, that's what happened. And then in the second year, I went to work in a factory in Michigan as an inspector on the production line at a Briggs Manufacturing. That was a great experience for me, learning what the automotive industry was all about. And of course, that's motion, transportation, and so on. That's what trains is. During that period, my train stuff kind of came to a halt. I didn't do anything. And I did get married, and then my career was now on its way. And so I was probably 23, 24 years old when I first started small collecting, getting a train set and playing around with it. And that just, one thing led to another. We joined some of the clubs and just had a ball.
Very neat. So it sounds like the trains were never that far from your mind. Obviously,
Right.
they went away for a little bit in high school, but it sounds like it came back really early into your career. It's not
It
like
did.
you made it into your 30s and 40s. I mean,
Oh, no.
you were back in your mid-20s, which is really pretty rare
Yeah.
in this hobby. Most people wait until after a family starts or after the kids have started to grow up. So for you, it was a little bit of a different story, it sounds like.
Right.
Very neat. As you continued to kind of collect and grow, when did you realize this is more than just a hobby for me? I mean, you you had to know at some point, I really care about Lionel. When did you realize, this is a really big hobby? I'm collecting a lot of stuff.
Yes, that did happen. But it happened and I didn't know it was happening. Let me put it that way. Because I started collecting and the collection started to grow. And I was probably 40 years old, I guess. Because my kids were, now coming out of college or out of high school and going on to college. And it requires space to do this kind of a thing. And I now had a home that I could do it in. So, yeah, I guess I was about 40. And I just started collecting and going to the train shows down in Toledo, Ohio, for the TCA and the train clubs down there. And as the collection grew, the people down there knew that I was collecting, all the fellows that would come to the conventions. And they would turn to me and they would say, "Dick, you own just about everything now in Lionel. Why don't you buy the company? That's the only thing you're missing." Well, that became a big joke, I don't know, for 4 or 5 years. They would kid me when I'd buy something big down there. But one day I got a call from my attorney here in Detroit, and he said, "Dick, have you ever thought about negotiating with Lionel to buy the company?" And I said, "Yeah, but I passed it out of my mind entirely. Why?" He said, "Well, I think that the Lionel Train Company could be for sale." And I said to my attorney, "Well, find out." So he called them, talked to them, and they said, "Well, who is this guy that wants to buy the company? Can you tell us that?" And my attorney told them, "Well, not without his permission, but I'll call him and get back to you." So he did. He called them and told them that, and told them my name, Dick Kughn, and they said, "Oh, okay, we'll call you back tomorrow." So the next day they called them back and they said, "We want to talk to him." And so we started talking. And that is when it came about that it was time to own the company.
Very neat. Let's step into your ownership of Lionel. Tell me one of your favorite memories about being the owner of Lionel. Was it the people? Was it walking into the plant during production? What made Lionel such a special place? Kind of paint a picture for our listeners and kind of take us there to what made Lionel so special for you. What are your favorite memories of being here in Michigan and owning the company?
Well, number one, it was a pride thing. I mean, Lionel was an iconic name in the toy train business. So, I was proud of owning the company. And during the time I owned the company, I could walk around the plant and talk to people, actually on the production line or painting booth or whatever. And I found that there were a bunch of nice people. And I think they found I was maybe a pretty good guy. But anyway, That's a memory I do remember because we had a lot of employees out there at the plant, and getting to know them and another side of life, if you will. The other things were in the management end, sitting down with the management people, talking about product line, what things should we be carrying, what should we tweak, where do we go from here with presenting to the public what we think they want, and hopefully gets correctly. Those meetings were very, very good meetings and a lot of fun. Those were two of the most important parts, I think, of my experience at Lionel. Going to the train shows, down at the TCA in Pennsylvania. They were all great experiences, really.
Are there products that stand out in your mind as favorite products that you guys created while you guys had the company? I mean, you guys did so many unique things during that 10-year period. What were some of your favorite projects that you guys worked on?
Well, first let me talk about a product itself.
Sure.
That we did do. During my ownership at Lionel, I bought a T1 locomotive, a big real one. And we took it off to Maryland to do the restoration on it. And we got it up and running, and that was a real experience. But I really fell in love with that T1 locomotive. So I came back and talked to our engineers, and I said, guys, can we produce that in the plant? And they said, sure, why not? So we did. And you'll see one of those engine intenders on the shelf in here. And so that was an experience that was very close to my heart. But that was one little isolated product. The one thing when I bought Lionel, there were several things I was concerned about. Number one, I didn't think we were putting the product out, the type of product that the public wanted. Number two, candidly, the quality of the product being produced was not there. Number three, they were not getting product out of the plant on time. Number four, the way they went about marketing, I wasn't a bit happy with. And so I said to myself, what would I like to do within the product line? Yeah, the things I just talked about. But in addition to that, I would like to expand into the electronic arena, which was in its infancy then.
Sure.
And barely even talked about. The electronics, the remote control systems, all of those things, sound systems. And this was a very memorable experience of getting to that point. And I knew we didn't have the engineering capability or design capability currently within Lionel at that time. So I looked for a company around that might have it, and I won't mention their name, but I talked to them. They came to Detroit and met with me. And when we were all done with the meeting, I was not quite happy with what we talked about there, the way they were going to go about it and approach it. So I sent them home. And about a year and a half later, I was continuing to think about this. And so at that time, they called me again. And they said, Dick, we'd like to come in and meet with you. I think maybe we have something now that would interest you. And I said, well, okay, you're more than welcome to come in. And they said, we have a guy named Neil Young who is becoming part of our company. And I said, who's that? And anyway, I said, fine, come on in. They came in. We spent a whole day talking about it. And they left. And I talked about it with our people, and I was unhappy with the direction it was taking with them. So I just called them and told them, thanks for coming in, but we're not going to do anything with you. About a week later, I got a call from Neil Young. And Neil told me, he said, Dick, I liked our meeting. I think you're on target. I'd like to get together with you, and I'm telling you now, I am not collaborated with the company. And can I come in and talk to you? And I said, sure. Neil came in, and we spent a whole day together. And we got our heads together. And he said, well, I'd like to buy into the Lionel company. I said, Neil, I'm sorry, none of it's for sale. But I'll tell you, we can create a new company called Lion Tech, if you will, and put that together with you as a 50% partner and myself as a 50% partner, and go to work on the development of the technologies that we all would like to see for sound, remote control systems, all of that whole package of electronics. And that's what happened. And that was the kickoff to one of the major happenings within Lionel and during my career there.
It's amazing just sitting here thinking about the developments that Lionel and Lion Tech brought into the hobby, really from about 91 to about 95.
Right.
And here we are in 2014.
Yeah.
And those early technology developments were the building blocks for, these amazing things like the legacy system now.
Oh, yeah.
We're on Rail Sounds version 5, whatever. But we've gone from this really, what at the time was really groundbreaking technology.
Yeah.
And the fact that it happened on your watch, and here we are, 20 years later, and just to look back and see the history, and what started as a really simple conversation and a really unique brainstorming session between you and Neil has changed the face of how we play with our model trains. And it's neat to hear that story about how Lion Tech got started, and it's really neat that you guys were clearly, all the way back then thinking about, okay, how do we bring the technology into the trains? How do we make the trains more fun to play with? And, you talk about the T1. The T1 was one of the first large die-cast steam engines, and here we are again 20 years later where we have, full-size scale articulated big boys and Challengers and Alleghenies. And all of it started under your watch. That's something you have to be really proud of.
Yeah, I am. I'm proud of everything else that went on at Lionel with our team that we had finally put together. They were all hard-working, dedicated people and loved what they were doing. And that was an important part of my owning Lionel, along with the technologies that we put together,
That's very neat.
An interesting thing, Neil Young, you say the name today, most people knew who Neil was, but I didn't. But as I got to know Neil, I realized really what a great musician he was and still is. In fact, I just talked to Neil this morning on the telephone.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Are
We
you
had
two?
a nice conversation.
I was going to say, if you two are talking, you two have to be cooking up something interesting.
No, we're not. We're just good friends.
That's really neat.
But anyway, he's a composer. He knows electronics. And this was one of the main things that interested me in Neil, because I was convinced that he was on the starting floor of the electronic world, okay? Mm-hmm. Because of his music.
Sure.
All the recordings and everything he was doing there. He was not only a good piano player, organ player, guitar player, but he knew how to write good music.
Right.
And a little different kind of music than I was used to. So anyway, life has been full of experiences like that, getting to know people, know who they are, what their talents are. And that was a great talent with our talent that we had at Lionel that we put together.
Yeah, and Neil today is still on the cutting edge of technology. If you look at some of the other projects he's actively involved in, the Link Volt project is a big
Yeah.
one that's near and dear to his heart. His new music player, we're talking about bringing high fidelity music in a portable music player. He's always been involved in these cutting edge technologies,
Right.
and that still holds true today. And what a great partnership between Lionel and a guy that clearly appreciates being on the edge of things.
Right.
So it seems like it worked out well for
And it
everybody.
did.
Very neat. One of the other things I want to discuss, something that you probably haven't discussed in a long time, is your other big purchase while you were at Lionel, among other things. And that was the purchase of Madison Hardware and taking Madison Hardware and moving it to Detroit. Did you visit Madison often while you were growing into the hobby, or how did you come to find out about Madison?
Well, I knew about Madison, but I'd never really had any reason to go to New York. I knew they had a little storefront. What really happened was through conversation with other train collectors. And that conversation was, Dick, I don't know whether you know much about Madison Hardware, but have you ever thought about going in and talking to Lou and Carl? And I said, no. And they said, well, you should probably do that because they're both getting up in age. And they really were. Mm-hmm. And apparently they wanted to divest themselves of the store before it was too late and it would just hang there in their estate to dispose of it. So I called and I talked to Carl in the store and told him I'd like to come in and talk to him. And he said, well, okay, come on in. Yes, I would like to talk to you about you buying the company. So I said, well, what I'd really like to do is send one of the guys that works for me in to do an overview and take some pictures of what is there, rather than me coming in and starting to do that myself and work from scratch.
And
So
was that Chuck Liebrock?
Chuck Liebrock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to
That's
make
who
sure.
it was.
I want to make sure I had my guy right.
You had him right.
Good.
And Chuck went in and spent a few days there and came back and he said, wow, they've got several locations there. They've got the store, they've got warehouse part behind the store and down the basement and another building down the street that has two big areas in it that has stuff. And he said, Dick, I can't do an inventory on it. I looked in a few of the boxes that I could see. I mean, they were all piled sky high right up to the ceiling. And you couldn't tell what was in them. But he looked at some of them and he said, there is some nice stuff there. And maybe you want to come in and talk to him. And so I called Lou back. He said, yeah, come on in. So my wife and I went in, and we sat down and started talking to him. Carl was not there. He was home. He was not feeling good. His wife, now I'm really tapping my memory, but either she was very ill at that point or had just passed away.
Okay.
So Carl was home, and I talked to Lou about the price, and his price was way too high, and I told him, well, look, I might just as well go back and get on a plane because you're way out of line with what you're expecting to receive. He said, well, what would you offer? So I offered, gave him a low ball, and he said, no, you know I can't do it that low. So anyway, we bantered back and forth, and each time we came to talking about a number, he'd go to the phone and pick it up and call Carl. He'd come back and he'd say, no, Carl says no. And so we finally arrived at a price, and I called again my banker in Detroit and told him how much money to wire to Carl. And we signed a quick agreement there saying that I had bought everything lock, stock, and barrel, which is what we did. But then we had to figure out how to get it back to Michigan. So we called a cartage company, it was semi-trailer. We spent 2 months hauling that stuff back to Detroit, and the end result was 16 semi-truckloads coming back to Detroit, loaded to the hilt. Wow. That's what was Madison hardware. Nobody had any idea there'd be stuff like that there.
When did you start to realize the scope of what you had just done, in terms of when did it set in that I've just bought something that has some really significant history to it? Was there a moment that you just went, wow, what did I just get myself into?
Yeah, there was. But that was because I really did not know what I had bought. Okay, I hadn't seen it all. I hadn't evaluated it all. And it took us over a year to unpackage and look at all these big cartons that our team put the stuff in. There was a lot of junk there, but there was some pretty nice stuff too.
Yeah.
So it turned out okay for me, but I didn't know. So yes, there was a long period of waiting and wondering, what have I gotten myself into? But it was a good thing.
Very neat. Now, when you were working with Lou and Carl, was your interaction with them basically then just the negotiation, or did you guys, talk more as you guys started, wrapping up the store? Do you have any favorite stories about either of them, or was it once the deal was signed, you chatted a little bit, but nothing serious?
We did not develop a long-term relationship, no, but we did develop a nice, on the moment, relationship. And we went to lunch one day. Lou took us to lunch at a restaurant or a club or wherever it was, and we ordered our lunch. And Linda and I, my wife, we decided that, well, we'd like a cocktail after all this. And so we told Lou that we'd like one. Oh, well, I don't drink, but I'll have something, but I don't drink liquor. We said, okay, fine. So when the waitress came over, he looked at her and he said, I'm going to have my usual. And boy, he had a brandy.
Ah.
That's a story I'll never forget.
Seems like that fits the personality pretty well from all the other stories that are floating around, but it sounds like it was possible to have a really good working relationships with them. I've always heard they were either hot or cold, and it seems like...
I'll tell you something on that one.
Sure.
People were calling, customers, while I was there, and he'd answer the phone. No, I'm sorry, we're closed. I'm doing inventory. It's going to take me quite a while. Talk to you later. Bye. Click. Well, he wasn't about to tell him he had sold it. That was one. While we were there, a guy came into the store, and he saw what he wanted, and he looked at it and asked Lou how much, and Lou gave him the price, and he came back with a counter offer. You know what Lou did? You've never heard this? It happened repeatedly, quite often. You don't like my price, there's the door. Go on home, take your business elsewhere. And he'd push them out the door and send them away.
Well, I think they must have had some idea that they were sitting on some pretty special pieces, and that, over the years they must have kind of figured out that, wait a second, nobody else has this stuff. And so I guess in a way they kind of had the right to do that.
Yeah, I guess so. But he really did not know what they had.
Really?
No, a lot of it had gone out the back door.
Okay.
We found, unfortunately.
Okay.
And he had no idea what was still there and the value of it or the rarity of it. Call it whatever you want.
Sure.
But It was an interesting transaction, and we had an interesting time with it here in Detroit once we got it back.
Yeah, let's move to that for a little bit. You and your team painstakingly, and I mean painstakingly, documented just about every inch of the store in New York when you were packing up and subsequently moving the store. What were your intentions when you brought it back to Detroit? Was your intention to try and recreate the New York store, or did you have your own plans in mind at that point?
At that point, I really did not know because I did not know what the product was. And no, we did not do an inventory before we shipped it. We were just interested in getting it put together in larger cartons, these shipping cartons, to get it on the trucks and get it back here where we could take it to our new warehouse and start unpacking and taking inventory. Well, the more we got into it, trying to do an inventory, even then was an impossible thing. There was so much stuff. So we just put it up on the shelves, and we said, well, we've got to dispose of it, so we might as well. Oh, but let me just break at this moment and say that when we bought Madison Hardware, I also bought all the right title and ownership of the trademark and the name and everything else, so that we could go by their name if we wanted to, which
Sure.
we did.
Sure.
And that's really what happened. And it was a big learning experience for all of us.
Sounds
But
like
it was a fun thing. It was a hobby thing.
As you guys sorted out the inventory once you made it back to Detroit, what were some of the interesting and your favorite pieces that you discovered in these 16 semi-loads of inventory? There had to be some pieces that your jaw just dropped and you go, oh my gosh, I had no idea.
A lot of it was duplication of stuff. If you're talking about a one-of-a-kind something, I really don't remember any of those kinds of things. There was a lot of train stuff. Oh, we had a lot of factory part bins, just loaded with parts. To take care if somebody needed a widget for their locomotive or a coupler or whatever the case may be, we probably had it there. And customers used to come in and wander around with a little basket and go through those parts and pick out what they wanted, come up and say how much, and we'd tell them, and they'd go home with it. It was that kind of a situation. There were some train boxes, train sets,
Sure.
things like that. But nothing of a major spectacular finding. Nothing.
No factory sealed blue comets or anything like that. Was there anything that you just kind of, as they unpack things, that you just saw it and I thought, I'd really just like to have that for my collection? Was there anything, even if it wasn't significant, that just stuck out to you and you thought, this would be really neat to have in my collection? Anything like that?
Well, there could be pieces in here, right? Well, no, we had a train layout down at Madison Hardware, a pretty good sized train layout. And most of that was made up of stuff that came from Madison Hardware.
Okay.
We didn't import any more, we just took what we had.
Okay. Huh. So you guys found a way to make sense, number one, out of all the chaos. And number two, you guys put together a store here in Detroit that was a nice representation and a nice tribute to the original in New York. And that's kind of neat to hear that the layout here in Detroit that was at Madison Hardware was mostly original equipment. That's pretty neat that you guys were able to pull that off.
The sign that was on the front of the building in New York, we took that down and brought it back.
Yeah.
And we had this warehouse in downtown Detroit where the fourth floor, the whole floor was Madison Hardware. And there was an elevator to go up, and at the elevator doors on the first floor, we hung and illuminated that huge sign. Madison Hardware.
That sign has become quite an icon in the industry, and the sign was sold in 2001 now, and it resides in a private collection now. I think.
Does it really?
The sign is in a private collection.
Well, I'm happy to hear that.
But you guys didn't just take the sign; you took the front door, the back door, the keys. When you guys closed up shop,
Yeah.
you guys closed up shop in New York.
Yeah, the front door, had signs on it and the glass and what have you, and we didn't want to disturb any of that. And so you're right, we did.
And the doors are now in a private collection and very well cared for from what I've heard and what I've seen. And so it's got to be neat that even after these items have passed from your hands, that they're in the hands of guys that truly care about the history of Madison Hardware, and the fact that you played a role in safely removing that history and transporting it to a location where there wasn't harm done to it, so to speak. It could have been very easily that the store had just closed and the sign disappeared into oblivion and everything else just gets scattered to the four winds right there in New York.
Yeah.
You sold a lot of your larger items in the early 2000s. You ran into some health complications, and so you sold off most of Madison Hardware and quite a few of your cars, and subsequently you've started to recollect most of that in some way, shape, or form. After those auctions, though, clearly we're sitting here in this train room. You've held on to a bunch of pieces still. What are some pieces that you didn't send to auction that are still very special to you that you've held on to?
The Madison cars, when I was a kid, back in the early 40s, I would drool over these Madison cars and want to have them. Well, I have collected them all. Joshua Lionel Cowan car, Richard Kughn car, Mazone Raphael car. These are very significant cars, and I had a lot of fun collecting those. I love these kinds of product. So to me, those are significant to my heart. The rest of this stuff, there are a lot of beautiful pieces on this set of shelves. Of the older trains, the shelf over there and on the far wall are more modern, more recent trains. It kind of shows the history and the development of Lionel Train Company.
Yeah, that's neat to hear that the Madison cars are so special to you, and it's always interesting, especially to hear somebody who was in your position that you own the company. I mean, you could have basically done whatever you want and had whatever you wanted, and it's kind of neat to hear that something as simple as Madison cars are what are special to you, and I think that's really neat. It's just interesting of all the things in the world that those mean something to you, and that's pretty neat. Over the years, you've had an opportunity to meet a lot of unique people in your different business adventures. Tell me about some of the interesting people that you've met along the way and who stands out to you.
I have known political people. I have known industrial people. I've known educational people, educators, top people within each of those arenas.
So what was it about Bush Sr. that stood out to you as somebody who, out of all of these people you've met?
He was just a great, great man.
Very neat.
He really was. He was a great president. He was a great leader. He was a great human being.
Huh.
That's my opinion.
Now, did he have any interest in toy trains? Because it sounds about that would have been about the time that you met him.
Yeah. We presented. I rode the train from Detroit to the Silver Dome, and on that train we presented to him on behalf of Lionel a train set, standard gauge, tin plate of the old tin plate days. And what set was that? Boy, I'll tell you. You're pulling my brain back into place.
I'm going to pull another one on you. I think, and this is me digging into my modern Lionel rare archives here. I think you guys also had a special run of Madison cars done for that train trip. I think there was less than 30 of them that you guys did. It was.
Yeah,
it was.
for handout. Now, was that on that trip or a political train trip?
Well, I think it may have been that trip. It was something.
I think so.
From what I heard, and this is, I'll ask you. This is what I heard: is you basically walked into the factory on a Friday afternoon and said, "I need this really, really, really quick."
Yeah, that's true.
And
I've got one here someplace.
From what I hear, they're near impossible to find. I mean, you want to talk about a Lionel rarity in the modern era? That car qualifies.
Oh,
yeah. And the other thing is we'll take some pictures. Both the white and blue car rail T1s are right up there in the tough
they're
things.
They're a rarity.
But I've always thought it was neat that Madison car that went out on that trip, number one, being produced in such low quantities, and number two, having that political connection. Yeah. Talk about a really unique piece of modern Lionel history. That's it. And so it's neat to hear that you just appreciated George Bush Sr. out of all these people who you've met as somebody who you thought, you know what, this is significant enough that all these years later that's who comes to the top of your mind as somebody significant. I want to also interject. For a long time, the LCCA has been right there with Lionel, working hand in hand together. And the reason we're actually in Michigan today is for an LCCA special event with you. What makes the LCCA so special, in your opinion, that Lionel, continues to work with them? And what is your favorite part of being involved with the LCCA?
Well, the LCCA speaks for itself. Lionel Collectors Club of America. It's a club all over the United States, and I don't know, maybe it even reaches out into foreign countries. I imagine it does. But the train company is the manufacturer. Unless they have a customer to buy those, Lionel cannot exist. One of the big arenas that helps Lionel exist is LCCA, because they spread the word. They do it all over the country. They travel. They do it. They're great supporters of Lionel, have been down through the years. And without that kind of activity of reaching out to families about toy trains, spreading the word and getting the word down to the kids, Lionel could not exist.
Any favorite memories that you have of your involvement with the LCCA during your time at Lionel, or even after that fact?
The people and just what they do. Their love of Lionel trains and their support of Lionel trains, far beyond that of our competitors.
I want to touch on three areas for a moment, and we'll kind of start to wind this down with these series of questions. I want to talk about past, present, and the future. Talking about the past, if you could go back and change one thing while you owned Lionel, that if you could have a do-over, what would you do over again and what would you do differently while you owned the company?
If I had it to do over again, which I could not because I was doing other things with my business career, I would have liked to have been able to spend 10, 12 hours a day at Lionel, shepherding it along, and I think I could have done a better job in getting the end product. But that was not in the chips. Right. I had to do it with people, and I had a good team. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't the same, in my opinion, without me there. So that's not something I could do over again. It's something that I realized I would have been nice if I could have.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Just to spend some more time there and just be more hands-on. But, we were talking before we went on the air here just about, you started the Upper Deck Trading Card Company at that point. You had your hands in so many different projects, so I can completely understand that idea of, I wish I could spend more time at Lionel, but you were a busy guy at that point.
Well, I also was president and chief operating officer of the Taubman Company, the mall developers.
Okay.
And that was a big job, believe me, because we were all over the United States.
Wow.
Developing malls. We did several right here in the Detroit area.
Let's talk about the present for a moment. Now that you've kind of stepped back out of you're not in train world every day, so to speak. Now that you've been out of involvement with Lionel on a day-to-day basis for a while, what's your current assessment of what the hobby looks like? What do you like about it? And Where do you think things are at with the hobby?
They've come a long way. I get the feeling that they have a team that probably knows what they're doing, even though they're not trained guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's my own personal opinion.
Let's talk about your visions for the future, and obviously having been at the forefront of this technology in the early '90s and starting to bring that in your wildest dreams, where do you think the hobby could go in the next 15 years? Where do you think the technology could take these trains? What do you think the future looks like?
First of all, the development of technologies in every arena is developing so fast, nobody knows what's going to come out tomorrow morning and trump the guy who was there.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has any idea. Even the big boys, I don't think they really know. They're doing what they can to meet what they've already got and get it in the marketplace before somebody comes in through the back door and dumps a new idea on the table that's going to trump them, and now, oh boy, they have to sit back and rethink it. There's going to be a lot of rethinking going on in the electronics world. In the world of operating toy trains, it's all going to be done, in my opinion, with a microphone, wireless.
Interesting.
And you will, just like they're doing with OnStar. You call OnStar, you say, I want to go from point A to point B. Okay, click, 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 and you got the map in front of you, and you're all set to go. The technology that had to be developed to get to that point where that could be done, all through just sitting in the car and talking, no mic, no nothing. I mean, you're just talking to the radio. So what's going to happen here? That could very well happen here.
Absolutely.
And I think probably it will.
Huh. I wonder if it'll get to a point where we can just sit here and think about, say, all right, I want my 700E Hudson to go down to this siding spot, 2 lumber cars, uncouple, and then return back to the yard. It would be interesting to see if we will get to that point. I think you may.
It could be, but right now you would have to say to switch 7, go to right hand or left hand.
That's a good point.
That is a possibility.
So you think there's still room to grow with these trains in terms of, I get the impression that you still think there's plenty of room for the technology to grow into the trains and that we haven't hit that zenith yet in terms of we can still take these trains to new places. Is that
true?
Is that a fair assumption?
I think that it will come to the point where you can have the TV in the front of the engine done by the manufacturer. I have a converted engine, Lionel engine here, that I put the equipment in.
Oh, cool.
And we have a TV on the wall over there, and I can turn it all on and watch the train cruise around.
Very neat.
But there's static with that, and there's a lot of development that can be done in that technology. I don't know where that's headed.
But there's plenty of room for us to go there, and I think that's neat because I feel like we're seeing a trickle-down effect right now, as the technology, out in the rest of the world, eventually some of it makes its way into toy trains in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah.
And so, as the rest of the world continues to develop technology for these mainstream items like television, cars, etc.,
Yeah.
it's somewhere down the road, the technology in some way, shape, or form makes it into the trains. And I think you raised an interesting point that, the idea of TV cameras coming back into trains, it's not a new idea. You guys did it in 1988.
Right.
But it's nothing that's been touched for a long time. But, there is plenty of room to upgrade that technology now and turn it into something that is 100 times better than what could have been done 25 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the technology I have in my engine here is a lot better than the technology we had when we did Railscope back at the beginning.
I want to wrap up with one last question. When you are gone, how would you like people to remember your legacy in this hobby? And I know that's a tough question to think about, but how do you want people to see your legacy in this hobby?
There's another guy in this hobby who has a fabulous legacy, Joshua Lionel Cowan. I would hope that I don't want to compete with him, but I would hope I'd have a nice legacy, similar to what Joshua has.
You heard it from the man himself. You've been listening to Richard Kughn on the Notch 6 podcast. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a true honor. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
Thanks for listening to Notch 6, the only podcast dedicated to O-gauge trains. You can find every episode on our website, notch6.com, or on iTunes and Stitcher. We'll see you again soon. Until then, be sure to keep it in Notch 6. The following has been a production of Notch 6 Media and is intended for private use only. This show may not be copied or redistributed without express written consent. This show copyright 2014, all rights reserved.